Okay. Hello, my love. We meet again.
We do.
Hmm.
We're going to talk
So,
about love languages.
yes, today, love languages. I have,
Cue the mutated energy.
what's that?
Cue the mutated energy.
Mutated energy. Um, yeah, I have between me and love languages, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an interesting um, history with the love languages, just in terms of having once brought up in conversation on social media, which we should always know better. Much of what I think we'll talk about today, and somebody did not respond well to it. And it was very interesting to watch that play out, and just served to, I think, for me, further solidify how misunderstood I think this topic is. So I think this will be a big one for people.
Yeah. Should we start by talking about what they are?
Sure, let's do that. Do
Okay.
you want to take the honors?
Sure. I'm going to pull them up so I don't miss anybody.
Okay.
Um, the guy who created this is ancient, and he's a PhD. So he has a PhD. I don't believe he's a therapist. I believe he has been doing counseling, mostly in it as a spiritual minister. So there is a little bit of the roots of this are in Christianity, or his Christian tradition at any rate. So the 5 love languages, the premise of the love languages is really just to categorize the way people express love for each other and have preferences for receiving love, which in and of itself is problematic.
Right out of the gate.
Conditional love.
So,
Right?
yeah, sorry, you broke up there. Say
Okay.
it again.
I said that, it's problematic because essentially what we're asking for is someone to give us conditional love
Right.
in a
Which
certain fashion,
we'll go into it. Yes, it is the definition of conditional love. So that's one of my concerns. I want to be clear. I don't have an issue with the 5 love languages book. I think it's a wonderful book. I think it can be very, very helpful for people. But I think it's important to understand exactly what it is that's going on there psychologically, in a different context other than calling it a love language. So yes, right out of the gate, everything that you talk about in the love languages is by definition conditional love, right? It's not unconditional. It's specifically saying these kinds of loves, these kinds of love work for me. These expressions of love work for me. These don't.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, I only know how to give this kind of love and this kind of
Conditional love.
these. And
Yeah.
I think this is what caused some conflict when I brought this up years ago online. My contention was, and still is, that if we demand that our partner speak our love language, to use the lingo from the book, or what's become kind of common language, then we are disconnecting ourselves from the actual love that they know how to give.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so yeah, there's lots of problems, I think, that show up with this book if we don't talk about the difference between love and the difference between unmet needs.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You want me to-
That's how I see it. That's where I see there's a conflation. The book calls it love languages.
Right.
Really, psychologically, what's going on is
These are my need languages.
I need languages. Yeah, and that's not bad, right?
No,
That's
it's
that's
not bad.
yeah. I mean, that looks tasty.
Hmm.
Um, yes, there's nothing wrong with being committed to a partner in a way where it's important to you to understand what their needs are and to be wanting to help meet those needs when and where possible, where it's not a boundary violation of your own, where it's not codependent, right? That kind of stuff.
Hmm. Right. I think we can get into all that when we talk about each one of the love languages.
Okay.
Um,
Go
can
ahead.
we list them?
Well, before we do that, I want to talk a little bit more just big picture context. Will you read again what you read about the love languages?
I was ad-libbing.
Oh,
But here's what it says on the website, the Five
okay.
Love Languages website. The premise of the Five Love Languages book is quite simple. Different people with different personalities give and receive love in different ways. By learning to recognize these preferences in yourself and in your loved ones, you can learn to identify the root of your conflicts, connect more profoundly, and truly begin to grow closer.
Yeah, again, I don't think that sounds wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't have any problem with that other than, um, I guess, other than the use of the word love, which is a pretty big deal. Um, as long as I think we're understanding that we're talking about the conditional ways human love is often expressed,
Mm-hmm.
then we're okay. And it's important to distinguish because I think that many of the people who are watching this now, who are taking part in this relationship course curriculum that we're sharing, we're teaching something different. We're teaching more than just how to be in a relationship that doesn't end in disaster. Um, it's wonderful that there are people who teach that. What we're talking about is awakening through relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something entirely different. And if our goal is to awaken through relationship, then it's really important to know what conditional love looks and feels like versus unconditional love. And if we really want to just sort of tell the highest truth, conditional love is not love. That's my hang up, I guess, with I think where people fall into a potential trap with this book and working with it is it will lead us to say things like, well, I've communicated what my love languages are, and you won't speak those languages back to me, and so therefore you don't love me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, my contention is that their love does not have languages. Love simply is. Um, that's so unconditional love to me is redundant.
Mm-hmm.
That's the highest level, I think, way to communicate about love.
Mm-hmm.
So right away when we come out of this grand unconditional love realm into the human experience of that, we're talking about the ways that people in relationship try to connect to love within themselves and with their partner, and that's done imperfectly. So it's not that we're tuning into and expressing conditional love. It's just that our ability to connect to love comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
In some situations, we're able to express love, and in other situations, we aren't.
Right.
Anything that I'm missing about that, or
No, I would just add to it that the redundancy, the unconditional love, how love really is not, can't be traded. So the downside, another downside of this love languages is it puts people into this attitude of, a healthy relationship involves these transactions of love languages back and forth. Like,
Right.
I do these acts of service for you, and you give me this quality time back.
Right.
And even the Gottman Institute, which I think we mentioned the last time we talked, has a little bit of that transactional language in it, because it talks about filling up one another's buckets.
Yes.
And as long as you look at love in that way of filling up one another's buckets, you're stuck in a cage. Essentially, you're stuck in a limitation.
Yes, you're stuck in a limitation, and I think you're stuck projecting love outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one of, I think, the dangers of, I don't even want to say the dangers of this book, the dangers of misusing or maybe misinterpreting the author's intentions, possibly, is that if I say my love language is physical touch, and I communicate that to my partner, and my partner's ability or willingness or whatever it might be to speak that love language to me will naturally ebb and flow. And if I perceive that ebb and flow as an ebb and flow of my experience of love,
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally disconnected from the reality of love, which is that it's in our own being.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlimited. It is without end. And it's always found within first and foremost. Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the danger, is that we outsource our connection to love.
Yeah, it's an inner resource, not an outer. Well, it can be experienced as an outer resource, but it's
Sure.
truly an inner resource.
Right. The outer experiences activate within us love that is always within.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
Say more about that. Tell me more about this, how you see this.
What else can I say about that?
So set up a scenario. You meet someone and you think, oh my God, I've fallen in love. What's really happening?
Right. Okay. So we'll dive into the what's really happening with what are being called love languages. In my experience with this personally, and my take on this, what's really happening is our own shadow material is being activated, unconscious dynamics are being activated. We are being sort of magnetized to somebody who activates specifically within us what we're unconscious about. Because all growth and healing is really about coming to know ourselves better. Right. It's all pointed towards self-knowledge, self-realization. Okay. And so there's that innate traction within us of our conscious mind to whatever aspects of ourselves are still unconscious. We're trying to find ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we're not familiar with that dynamic, what happens is we instead of understanding that we're trying to find and connect with these unconscious parts of ourselves, we see somebody who seems to exhibit a lot of those same characteristics as the unconscious parts of ourselves, and we project onto them and say, aha, this is the person who makes me, to use the Jerry Maguire line, completes me. Right.
Right.
Right. And so it looks like some other person completes you, and that feels amazing for a time. until it crumbles because no other person can really complete you, right?
Right.
So what's happening is where that initial pull and attraction is to our projected out aspects of our own unconscious self that somebody, for whatever reason, seems to model particularly well, right?
Okay.
So just go ahead.
Well, that helps me to understand what you think about attraction. I guess what I was pointing to uh, is the moment you meet someone, regardless of the attraction or the particular person, but when you meet someone or you're with someone with whom you suddenly find yourself in love with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so how I understand that now versus how, what I thought before, which I don't even know if I understood anything about it. But what I understand now is that that person points the way in in some way or for some reason. When you're in that person's energy or with that person, you have a deeper access to your own heart.
I think that's a wonderful way of putting it. I think that's perfectly consistent with what I described in more psychological terms,
Mm,
right? They point the way in. They're something about that person helps us connect with hidden aspects of our own being, and that movement of our self into our self integration and increasing recognition of self. That experience is love. We call
yeah.
that love. That's the feeling tone of coming to know ourselves better, of getting um, more connected to ourselves, of increasing our self-awareness. Really, we're falling in love with ourself,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
So coming back to this book, um, if if we really depend on or think we depend on our partner communicating quote love to us in just these specific ways, um, then what we're really saying is these are the channels within myself where I can't connect to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if I have, if somebody has, a love language, it's acts of service, for example, and what love looks and feels like to them is somebody else showing up and being of service to them. What that means is that where they are disconnected from their own being has something to do with being of service,
Mm-hmm.
to themselves, to the world, whatever it might be. Yeah. So the love languages, as you hinted at the beginning, are really pointing us towards our own shadow material.
Mm-hmm.
They're pointing us towards our unmet needs, what's unconscious within us, what's trying to come to life. And before we get into that, maybe we kind of stop and zoom out and use our current experience, which is our relationship, as an example of what we're talking about, what love looks and feels like beyond languages, right? So once upon a time, I would have said one of my love languages was physical touch.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I had a partner who was kind of cold or not physically affectionate or kind of warm in that way, I took that. Well, I don't want to give away the ending. That was a problem for me. Let's just say that.
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't attracted to women who didn't have that, or if I was initially attracted to them and then that wasn't present, it created a problem for me.
Yeah.
Right. So, so what that meant was that if I wasn't receiving physical touch from a significant other, I felt deficient in love,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
I projected that outside of me. Now, in our relationship, um, that's just not there.
Mhm.
Um, it's a little bit of a paradox because when you're really resting in unconditional love, all your needs are just met all the time. So, um, it's a bit of a paradox, but I could say about you and um, I feel enough physical touch and affection from you.
Mhm.
You are warm and physically affectionate in that way,
Mhm.
and yet also I don't need that at all.
Mhm.
Right. And like all things in relationship, things ebb and flow, and so we could go weeks without you being physically affectionate to me for some reason, and it would never even occur to me to interpret that as you are experiencing less love for me,
Mm. Yeah.
or I would never during that 2 week window think I feel less loved or I'm disconnected from love. So it's not that we can't like these things. It's just that we don't depend on them to be connected to love.
Mhm. Yeah. I think when I'm thinking about my own, well, first of all, I just want to briefly go over the love languages because I want to talk more about them. And if people don't even know what the love languages are, it's going to be very confusing. So, we've already kind of said one of them, acts of service. Acts of service are things like I'll take your car to get to the car wash and wash it for you. And, oh, I'm going to do the grocery shopping. Or do you need me to make a phone call for you? Or, doing chores and errands and things like that. Mhm. Kind of communicating the energy of taking care of the other person via actions. And then there's a language, a gift language, receiving gifts. Receiving a heartfelt gift is what makes them feel most loved.
Yeah.
So birthday presents, Christmas presents, seeing something at the store and thinking, oh, that person would like it, and getting it and giving it to them.
Flowers, chocolates.
Flowers, chocolates. Quality time, which is about giving the other person your undivided attention. And whatever that entails for the person. And then words of affirmation, which is, saying positive things to the other person, telling the person they love you, you love them, communicating verbally or via written words. And then physical touch, which you already kind of spoke to. So I'm thinking about, as you were talking about acts of service and how, if a person's preference is for acts of service, it means maybe there's an aspect of them that's not fully in service to themselves. And I thought about the conundrum of some of these love languages. Like in some relationships, there have been preferences for acts of service. Like in my marriage, that was a big way that I liked to receive love.
Mhm.
And I think part of that was my own learned helplessness and powerlessness and feeling unable to do everything that was being asked of me and feeling overwhelmed and just inundated with the responsibilities of being a grown up and raising two raising two kids. Oh, Lord. Raising children and, going to work and all the things that are asked of us in life. Just having someone there who is consistently showing up and doing things for me felt like a relief from
Mhm.
the burden. But another love language that, I would say was more important in my relationship with you, or it was in the beginning, was physical touch. That to me was very important. But in my marriage, that was less important. In fact, undesirable at times, because I had 2 children and they were always all over me, and I did not want to receive love. So there were kind of shadowy aspects to rejecting that love language and not wanting to receive it and feeling overwhelmed by it. So being really a problem, I don't see them as a problem in themselves. It's more a problem if you are insisting on a preference for one or another without becoming conscious of why. Like
Right.
if you are awake and aware of why you have these preferences, you communicate them to your partner. Acts of service are important to me because I feel very overwhelmed, and I feel less overwhelmed when I have someone helping me with these things. And then you, of course, are open and allowing the person to say, no, I can't do this for you right now, or whatever. Yeah.
So would you have said that in your marriage, acts of service was your love language or a love language?
I would say, yeah, I think it was a love language that I really appreciated.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's not that, well, I think it makes a point about love languages for me to share that in our relationship, that's not the role that I play. You're
No.
far more giving of acts of service than I am. At least that's my perception in our relationship.
You're giving more or receiving more?
No, that I'm receiving more, that you're more of the acts of service half of the relationship, right? And so clearly something has shifted in you where that's not a requirement for you anymore, right?
Oh.
So if we use the language of the books, what that means is that, okay, then love languages shift and change.
Mhm.
But really what's actually happening is that through your process of healing and waking up and self-realization, you've gained access to actual love, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And therefore you don't require specific expressions of conditional love from outside of you,
Yeah.
right? Like if that were truly a love language, if that was a love language that was wired into your psyche, then you wouldn't have fallen in love with me, or we wouldn't still be together, or we'd have a lot of problems in our relationship, right?
Oh my Lord, yeah.
That's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
Except
Although,
that's not true. We have a very loving relationship. So
mhm.
um, so these things shift and change, and it's not because, again, it's not that you forgot one language and learned another one. It's that love encompasses all of these ways of being in a relationship, and you don't need me to show up in a specific way consistently, um, in a consistent way with respect to the love languages, right?
Right. I mean, just today I was thinking about these love languages, and, you know, for whatever reason, I was having a tough morning. And so I received from you all of the love languages except the present. I didn't receive a gift.
Okay.
But the acts of service, you helped, gave me some energy work. You asked me if there anything I can do for you. You told me how much you loved me. We've had quality time where we were talking about things. um, you gave me hugs. I mean, these are all love language expressions
Yeah.
of love that I have received from you, and I didn't have to ask for any of them.
Right. And they were all entirely organic. It never occurred to me that I needed to express love to you in some specific way. Right. And so that's
Right.
wonderful. That's how it played out. Yay me right today.
Good
Great.
job.
But there are other days that you've struggled that maybe you've received none of that from me for whatever reason. Maybe I've been grumpy or had my own thing to take care of, or whatever. And you didn't love me less, or you didn't perceive that I loved you less, right?
No, right. That doesn't change
Yeah,
for me
that's
now. It would have in the past, but not now.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I think to me, that's the point that we'll come back to and try to drive home for people over and over, is that if you perceive there to be a loss of love in either direction, depending on whether or not these 5 things are happening in your relationship, that's not love. That is not what love is.
Right.
That's unmet shadow needs that you're still outsourcing and externalizing instead of resourcing within yourself. So I think you had a great example of what was it that you connected the dots around, the unmet needs, excuse me, the acts of service, and why that was so
Well,
important. Where do you think that came from?
my desire for acts of service.
Yeah.
Well, one thing is I learned that doing things for people is how you show love in my childhood, because that's one of the ways that my dad would show love for my mom. And he was really good at all the other love languages too. But one of the main things that I grew up observing was my dad running errands or doing some chore for my mom or whatever. Like he was frequently doing things for her. And so, I chose and married a man who is exceptional at doing these things for his partner and for his kids. Like when I met him, I remember someone said about him, oh, he would give the shirt off his back for anyone.
Mm.
And that's actually very true. Like that's one of his main ways of giving love or expressing that he loves you. And so in that dynamic of being married to a man who's giving love, acts of service was the main expression of love, or one of the main expressions of love, is that I began to learn that I learned helplessness. I learned to be helpless because whatever the difficult thing was, he was going to take care of it. And so when I came out of that marriage, I had a lot of that residual helplessness, and I didn't know how to do things, and I didn't even want to do things. The things that I could, if I, before being married, easily have done myself and would not have perceived as being difficult or painful or in any way problematic. But I resented all the things that I needed to do for myself when I came out of that marriage.
Yeah.
And I saw it as a loss of love. Like I've lost this resource. But over time, I learned to embrace those things.
Okay.
So that, and also going back to my childhood, I also was an acts of service person. I was also someone who wanted to be helpful. I mean, I was always baking cookies for people and, buying people lunch and many things.
Okay. And so when you were on the giving end of that love language,
Mhm.
what was going on for you psychologically? Again, this is all in retrospect, having done healing, but that's the point of what we want to
Right.
show, right? What was going on for you psychologically when you were the giver of the acts of service, the provider of the service?
Well, back then it was absolutely, I'm going to bake these cookies for these people and I'm going to be able to bask in the gratefulness that they are going to have for these cookies or whatever,
Mhm.
It was all about receiving the gratitude,
Okay.
receiving, it wasn't entirely about that, but I did have that. That was my secondary gain. I got to give, which felt good in and of itself. I enjoyed giving, but I also got to receive or perceived that I received gratefulness, love, kindness, appreciation. Yeah.
Okay. So in this particular example of something was a love language for you,
Mhm.
um, Again, this isn't making it a problem that we engage in acts of service for others and specifically for our partners. It's just about looking deeper than that. If you hadn't looked deeper than that, then there would have remained these shadow aspects of your psyche in the unconscious, right? It never would have occurred to you that sort of just spontaneously, oh, maybe this acts of service love language of mine is really about kind of subtly manipulating other people to give me the love that I wanted,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or when I'm on the receiving end of that, I call it acts of service. My husband provides certain acts of service for me, but you never would have gotten in touch with the reality that there was this part of you that part of your psyche with a shadow of I can't do this for myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you just sort of rest in the love language, right? If you had just said, this is just my love language, this is
Yeah.
just how I'm wired, this is biological, it's wired into my psyche, and nothing else to see here. It's just for whatever reason, my love language is acts of service. I like to give it, I like to receive it. That's what makes me happy. That's not a path to knowing yourself.
No, it's a dead
That's
end.
that's a dead end.
Yeah.
It's a hamster wheel. Like you will
Yeah.
just continue to sort of be in that dynamic, and never come closer to knowing yourself, which is to know unconditional love,
Mm-hmm.
right? And often, at least this is my experience, these love languages have to sort of blow up in some way, right? Or the relationship has to have difficulty to sort of shake us out of this pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in some hypothetical situation where people have, let's say, one partner has these two love languages and the other partner has two different love languages, and they show up for each other perfectly in that this person is always able to provide and communicate through these languages, and this person's always able to provide, and they say, isn't this great? All our needs are met, right? That's a recipe for never ever coming to know yourself.
Mm.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a problem to show up for one another in your relationship.
Yeah. It's just be conscious about why and how you're doing it.
That's right. And so for me, it would have been easy. My example would be, again, physical touch was what I would have said as a love language of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had met a partner, 10, 15 years ago, that spoke that love language fluently and loved to provide physical touch. And I felt totally content in that this is my one love language. That's not actually true, but just to make this easier, let's say that's the one love language I had, and I have a partner who showed up and spoke that love language perfectly. I never would have come to know that deep within myself, I didn't really love myself.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really feel that level of affection and love, not just of myself in an abstract way, but love of like my body, how I look, how it felt to be in a body.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact I had a lot of healing that needed to happen around body identification, and old trauma and things like that. That I never would have been provoked into getting in touch with, except I happened to fall in love, to use your example, with somebody who wasn't particularly physically affectionate.
Yeah.
Right. This comes back to your first question, but ask, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? Well, specifically because there was this still unconscious part of me, the unconscious part of me that knows that love doesn't need to be physical. And it doesn't even have to involve touch. It can, that's fine, but it doesn't have to. And I wasn't in touch with that part of myself. And so I fell in love with somebody who, again, in retrospect, I could kind of look at the whole message and say, see, somebody loved you
Mhm.
and wasn't particularly physically affectionate with you.
Mhm.
And I know that to be true. I have no doubt that my ex-wife loved me to the best of her ability. It just didn't happen to include a lot of, she wasn't a real touchy-feely type.
Mhm.
Um, and so because of that, I was forced to confront that I had this unmet need within myself, and it was a part of why our relationship didn't work.
Yeah.
That I was still externalizing that and projecting that out and saying, well, this isn't, I can't, this isn't working for me. I can't do this. Um, I need somebody who's more physically affectionate. Um, and if I hadn't really looked deeper into that, I would have continued probably in similar patterns. I would
Mhm.
have constantly been with somebody who um, failed to meet my expectations for speaking my love language, because the whole thing is a setup,
Mm.
right? As long as we're still externalizing our needs and insisting that our partner fill the bucket, so to speak,
Mhm.
then it's destined to fail, because that's not where our needs are met, right?
I think the tricky thing with what you just said, um, hmm, there's some people who in relationship are giving and giving and giving, and they're doing all the love languages towards everyone in their life, and they perceive themselves as being like just really good at loving, and they build up a lot of resentment towards people who are not matching their energy.
Right.
They're not loving them in such explicit ways. And to tell a person who's doing that, that they don't, that they shouldn't get what they need in relationship is a very, it's not appropriate at some
Agreed.
levels of healing.
I totally agree. Yeah, again, it's a little bit of a paradox, and we have to, everything we're saying about love languages also has to then be sort of buffered with um, the reality that it is okay to have what you want in a relationship,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It is absolutely okay for you to be in the kind of relationship you want to be in, and to have a partner who you feel connected to in the ways that it's important for you to feel connected.
Hmm.
We're not saying don't do that, or to use the Gottman Institute language, we're not saying, I'm not saying,
Hmm.
um, never let your partner fill up your bucket, or that it's inappropriate for your partner to fill up your,
Or that you shouldn't have buckets,
or that you shouldn't have buckets, right? Whatever it might be, right?
because you're going to have buckets for a long time.
Yes. And so again, in this metaphor, what we're talking about is something is needed in that bucket to feel alive, fulfilled, happy, content, loved, etc. Um, and it's perfectly fine to be with a partner who is able to help you fill that bucket. Um, the key is whether or not we put responsibility, I think, on the partner to do that. If we
Yeah.
make that our partner's job, and we make the happiness in the relationship contingent upon that, then we're in big trouble,
Hmm.
right? So it's perfectly appropriate for us to um, enjoy acts of service, benefit from them, feel uh, it's like I would say I don't have any love languages, and yet you do these things for me. The acts of service is one that really resonates with me. I don't expect it and I don't need it, and yet when you do it, it always feels amazing to me. It helps connect me with love,
Hmm.
helps me feel that connection within myself, right?
Right.
So it's not a problem that you fill up my bucket in that way or seem to fill it up in that way from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that my bucket is my responsibility. And I know that if you go weeks without putting anything into my bucket, it says nothing about how much you love me.
Right.
Right?
Not really.
Not really. No.
It might say something about how healthy our relationship is from an
Yes.
external perspective.
Well, it says nothing about how much you love me, because we're in an unconditionally loving relationship. That may not be true for others.
Right. Yeah.
So again, when we're still working through healing and we're in relationships that are more stuck in conditional love,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, if you've communicated to your partner, hey, it's really important that these 5 things happen from time to time, and your
Mm-hmm.
partner expresses zero interest in ever doing those things, it's okay to not be okay with that.
Yeah. I think that's super important for people to know.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when people are teaching about relationships, especially from a spiritual perspective, the message people receive is, if you want to be an unconditionally loving person, you'll take whatever you can get,
Right.
even if it's like, dregs of whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that's an excellent point to say just a little bit more about that. We can't force ourselves into unconditional love,
Mhm.
especially in a relationship. I would say not only can't we shouldn't. It's just not going to work. Right? You don't stay in bad relationships out of some abstract sense of that's what unconditional love looks like. Because, as we've said from the beginning here, our only true connection to love is within,
Mhm.
right? And if you haven't found that unconditional love connection within yourself,
Mhm.
then you're not going to be able to force yourself into that with somebody else.
Right.
And this is an example of healthy selfishness or healthy self-centeredness. It's not really selfish, it's not really self-centered, but the phrases work.
Mhm.
Where we recognize there's an unhealthy dynamic and we say, wait, I have importance here, I have rights here, my health, my well-being is a part of a critical part of yeah, I don't even know how to express it's number one.
Yeah.
And if we're not showing up and taking care of ourselves unconditionally first, then it's impossible to move into unconditional love with a partner.
And I think the process of moving into unconditional love is an organic process. So
Mhm.
the recipe for this, honestly, is, every day you're asking yourself questions about why you feel a certain way. Where does it come from? So, when you and when we were first in relationship, there were times when I would use my love language of acts of service in a weaponized way.
Mhm.
And so, you responded to that by being hurt and offended, and pointed out to me, hey, that's very disempowering. And so then I got the opportunity to look at, what was I doing? Why was I doing it? And clean up my side of the street.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we can use these love languages as tools to become more conscious of how we are in relationship to ourselves and in relationship to each other. If I'm longing for more quality time, which is, if I had to put any rating or ranking of the love languages, I would put that one number one for me.
Mhm.
If I'm feeling like I'm not getting a lot of quality time or whatever, I'm going to be looking hard at, where can I build quality time in for myself? What needs to be heard and seen?
Mhm.
And can I, it's important for me to ask that from you, because the shadow part of me wants to withdraw. And like, if I don't feel it coming towards me, I'm like, well, forget it. I'll go take care of myself, you know? So there's two ways I work with that. One way is to consciously reach out and say, hey, is this a good time to talk? I would like to be heard. And B, I also make sure I set aside time for myself where I'm seeing and hearing myself through journaling or writing poetry or whatever I need to do.
Yeah.
So, as long as you're in this place where you are seeing love as something that's given and received, then naturally this love language paradigm is going to be something that you can use to awaken and be
Yes.
deeper and deeper into the love that is everywhere. And once you are in touch with that, it ceases to have any importance at all, really.
Right. It stops, ironically, it stops
Yeah.
becoming love language.
Hmm.
Yes. So let's maybe walk through that for each one of these. Some examples of um, where there's opportunity to come to know ourselves better, depending on what we call our love languages, or
Okay.
which love languages we sort of identify with, because that's kind of the goal here, right? That's what we're saying is that the love languages has value. It has value in relationship, um, but its primary value is one of self-exploration,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
And if we're not using it as a tool for self-exploration, then the relationship is going to continue to be more difficult than it needs to be.
Hmm.
So, so words of affirmation. Which ones have we talked about? Let's go to,
We mentioned them all.
we've mentioned them all at this point. Okay, so let's kind of then review and consolidate here. So words of affirmation. There's somebody that says, this is a love language of mine, and I need my partner to show up and say, I love you, and tell me how good I am, and whatever else. Are there other examples? I seem to
No,
not feel connected to words.
that's essentially it. Being able to say to someone, I love you, I appreciate you, thank you for doing this thing, showing gratitude verbally, showing appreciation verbally. And I think for a lot of the like baby boomer generation, they would put words of affirmation very high on their list, because parents in the 40s and 50s, 60s were not very adept at using words of affirmation with their children. Kids would have to know that they were loved through acts of service, generally.
Okay. So let's look then at words of affirmation, and on the one hand we say there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying I love you to your partner,
Mhm.
saying kind things to your partner, telling your partner what you appreciate about them. And there's nothing wrong with receiving that and feeling loved, feeling connected to love.
Right.
All of that is wonderful. On the other hand, if we're not exploring why that is our love language, what are we missing? Well, if I have to constantly be told that I'm doing a good job, then what is there in the shadow of my psyche? This deep fear that I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's a fear of being rejected. And the only thing that keeps that fear of rejection from coming up and consuming us
Mhm.
is hearing that our partner is content with us.
Yeah. Yeah. like almost like a, you're drowning and someone's throwing you a life preserver and you're just waiting for like the next life preserver to be thrown to you, and then you're okay for a little while.
Right. Yes. Another metaphor that comes to mind would be, because I think that this is actually more than a metaphor. I think this is accurate, alchemically, that this unhealed shadow stuff within us is essentially a poison to our psyche.
Mm.
It has the ability to literally make us sick, mentally sick, physically sick, right? And so somebody who has, again, let's say a fear of rejection and or deep sense of not being good enough, that poison begins to build in the system. And every time their partner says, "Oh, I love you, you're amazing, you did such a great job with this, thank you," it's like a dose of medicine. It's a little bit of an antidote to that poison.
Like a little Alka-Seltzer or something.
Yeah. So the problem then is that if those words of affirmation go away, we literally become more sick.
Mm.
We might become physically sick. We might become, mentally sick in terms of being full of anxiety or having difficulty sleeping. It can manifest in a million different ways.
Mhm.
But there, the catch is that, we've connected the medicine to our partner, and only our partner can supply that medicine and antidote to what's going on. And as
Right.
long as we think that's true, and as long as we make it a relationship problem, right? And so then when I feel anxious and become afraid of rejection, and all of a sudden my sense of my own self-value begins to plummet, why is that happening? Well, because I'm with the wrong partner, because my partner won't show up and communicate to me how important and loved that I am.
Right.
And that, of course, is not why that's happening. It's happening because there's all of these unhealed aspects of the psyche, that haven't been looked at yet.
Right.
So that would be one example for words of affirmation.
Right.
So
And so as an antidote to that,
mhm.
a person could learn how to give themselves words of affirmation, which, I still do that every now and then. If I'm feeling really worked up, I'm just like, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. It's all right. Everything's good,
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also look into where, even asking the question, okay, what are these words of affirmation antidoting within me? If I
Mhm.
didn't have the words of affirmation, what comes up within me? Not in the relationship. Don't make it about the relationship. What comes up? Well, if I don't have words of affirmation, then again, I just feel like I'm not good enough, or I don't have any value.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Now you're in touch with something that needs your attention. And there's
Right.
all kinds of ways to begin engaging with that. But now you can actually work with what is your wound.
Mhm.
And when that's healed, only then do you really get to enjoy the words of affirmation, right? Like, an alcoholic doesn't really enjoy alcohol,
Right.
right? It just, let's use a better example. A heavy drug addict in the throes of withdrawal, right? And everything's that's sort of biologically and psychologically happening while in withdrawal. That next usage of the narcotic is not about enjoyment.
Mm.
There's no real enjoyment there. It's just make all of the bad stuff stop,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. And it's
And
only
so
temporary.
it's
Yeah.
only temporary, and it's not about enjoyment. Um,
Mhm.
addicts, gambling addicts don't enjoy gambling. Alcohol addicts don't enjoy alcohol. Food addicts don't enjoy food. They're in a state of intense anxiety when they're engaging with those things.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who had a bad relationship, an unhealthy relationship with food for much of my life, I still remember the revelation of like just taking a bite of food for the first time in my life and feeling pure enjoyment without anything connected to it. It was just the pure enjoyment of the sensory experience of the food. And it was like, wow, this is literally the first time I've ever really, truly enjoyed food, period.
Mm-hmm.
Every other time it was attached to something. So that's when we can really come to just enjoy. And this is, again, I would say this is true in our relationship. I know we both appreciate receiving words of affirmation. It feels really good and we really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, our ability and the depth to which we enjoy that is specifically because we don't really need it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. The less we need it, the more those words. I mean, we probably say "I love you" to each other 100 times a day if we counted them.
Yeah.
And when it could look like anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
like we have to say these things, repeat, but it really isn't. It's sort of this, because we're so open to love and we're so connected to love within ourselves. It's just sort of a natural outcome of that.
Yes, and it's a natural expression that is its own end. It's not
Mm-hmm.
trying to get somewhere or be something or receive something back. So,
Right.
uh, there's times where one of us will say, I love you, and the other one will just kind of like, mm-hmm, or
I
nod.
know, I did that the other day, didn't I?
Yeah, you
I
did.
was like, okay.
Yeah, you did. Like, oh, I love you. Okay. Great. But there's no diminishment because
No.
it was just a spontaneous offering. I didn't need anything back.
Right.
Um,
It was kind of funny.
yeah, and
It
you
broke the
didn't put
social
any
code.
affirmation in that particular moment. Apparently.
Well, it's because
You'll-
I heard the intention behind the words.
Right.
I didn't need to respond to the words because I felt the intention, and the response to that was okay.
And I know that you've said I love you, and I've just said I know.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. So
Right.
okay, so that's a good example of um,
I want to add something though
going
before we
on
go
with
on.
what's that?
I want to add something before we go on real quick.
You do that.
Just one thing to be aware of with words of affirmation. For some people, it's very uncomfortable
Mm,
um, and painful. And to hear "I love you," it creates suffering because of that poison inside. So, you used to tell me that I was the bravest person that you ever knew and your hero. And that was like, I mean, you might as well have stabbed me in the heart. That's how I received that, because I felt the opposite of heroic and brave
mm,
in those times. Although
yeah,
at the same time, I appreciated and craved to hear what you were saying.
right.
So just knowing that within yourself, if you have that kind of reaction to hearing something, words of affirmation or any of the love languages, it's revealing to you not just a preference, it's revealing to you a wound, a deep wound.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um, okay. So next, acts of service.
We've kind of talked through that.
Okay. Yeah, your example was acts of service, but again, just to kind of consolidate a little bit and summarize around that. Um, in your example, there was a sense of it was programmed into you. This is what love looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Love is acts of service.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the problem isn't that it's not that acts of service can't be a part of a loving relationship. It's just that when we're programmed to understand or believe that those are the same thing, love equals acts of service, then we're missing most of what love is,
Yes.
right? Love is way more than that. And in fact, it doesn't even necessarily need to include acts of service in that way, although often it spontaneously will.
Right.
But it does make great sense that acts of service is a common love language. But it was programmed into you that there's a one-to-one relationship there. Love and acts of service are identical.
Mhm.
So again, if we're not exploring why our love language is our love language, then we're not really coming to a deeper understanding of love, and we're not coming to a deeper understanding of ourselves. Also, for you, there was a sense of neediness that
Mhm.
was present, and you didn't necessarily express that it was there all along. But let's move into the hypothetical. Somebody else who has a love language of acts of service could very well be because of this deep wound of helplessness,
Mhm.
right? And so because that their particular, the poison in their psyche is feeling helpless and disempowered, the medicine is having somebody else in your life who shows up and antidotes that by doing the difficult things for you.
Mhm.
Or sometimes not even the difficult things, just stuff, just do stuff
Something,
and,
anything. Yeah.
and know. And that way I can know that you're here to do stuff for me,
Mhm.
uh, that I can't do or don't want to do, right?
Right.
So that's where the shadow side could be around. Again, these are just examples. This is by no means exhaustive. um,
I think this is the most, when I work with women, this is the number one love language that they feel is not met by their husbands. There's a lot of women out there burning themselves out trying to do everything and looking at their husband and saying, "You're not doing anything."
ah,
And the husband, if there's some husbands that I work with them too, their story about what acts of service are does not match the story that the wife has.
hmm,
So their acts of service are things like making sure the taxes get done, working 9 to 5, working overtime,
correct,
managing various things. And the wife is like, "But you don't help me with the dinner, and I do all the laundry, and no, you never come to the kids' games." And
right.
there's a mismatch even within the acts of service love language. There can be.
Okay. Yes, and what also stood out to me from that was just that, again, the love language can be kind of a cover for your own um, compulsiveness, right?
Mhm.
Like in
Mhm.
this case, it's really important. If it's really important to the person to always be doing, right? And this has
Mhm.
nothing to do with relationship. You gave a relationship example, but we see this in people all the time. They
Yep.
just always have to be on the go, always have to be
Mhm.
doing, getting something done, achieving, working on the next thing, go, go, go. Um, that if activity is what their life looks like, then they're going to demand that their partner
Meet their energy.
meet their
Mhm.
energy, connect with them in that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Touch them.
or it won't feel like love. And this is perhaps the best example we've come up with yet. In this case, that's not a love language at all. That's not in this particular expression. That's not an
Yeah.
expression of love. That's an
Right.
expression of um, managing, compulsivity or neuroticism.
Mhm.
Um, I'm neurotic, and if you're not matching my energy, then you don't love me. It's like, no, that's got nothing to do with love. So
Right. Yeah.
that's a good example.
I find that the acts of service has a lot of stickiness to it. There's a lot of unconsciousness around why we do the things we do for our partners. and our unmet expectations, what we want to receive. And I
Yes.
think that in this culture, particularly, doing things for people is really considered to be loving.
Yes. And so that's another category, people pleasing, right? I know we both worked with so many people over the years, um, who really don't see a shift in their life experience and really don't experience a lot of healing until they look at and engage with these deep patterns of people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a million reasons, that can come to be, that these patterns of people pleasing. We often see it with, people who grew up in really chaotic home environments, abusive or alcoholic parents, absentee parents, whatever. And they grow up learning to manage their surroundings and make sure that everybody is kind of happy and content, because that's what keeps them safe.
Right.
Right. So these are very, very deep wounds and very deeply ingrained old traumatic patterns that if we just years later say, nope, this is just my love language and I need you to do stuff for me, or it means you don't love me, like, we have entirely missed what's going on within our own psyche. And also, that's just an impossible thing for a partner to, that's not even a bucket to fill. That's the ocean.
Yeah, right.
That will never get filled from a partner. So another good example of how much more is going on beneath the surface of a simple love language, like, oh, I speak the acts of service love language.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Let's talk about receiving gifts.
Yes, let's do that. Oh, I'm so bad at gifts. Oh, I'm great at receiving gifts. Bad at giving the gifts. Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on this, giving and receiving gifts?
Well, I would say that receiving gifts or giving gifts has always been come very naturally to me. And there's definitely some shadow side to that, because what I learned growing up, and just generally in my life, is that you pay attention to the people around you. And when they express some kind of interest or desire, you put it into your mental notebook. So the energy is really one of, on the gift giving side, one of centering other people and just, really, really being attentive. It's part of the people pleasing thing.
Okay.
And so I'm a great gift giver because I have learned to be very conscious of what people's desires are and to try to meet them. And one of the ways you can meet them, at least for a brief moment anyway, is to give them a really thoughtful, like the most thoughtful present possible,
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think if I have any experiences with this. I guess my personal experience with this is just being really bad at gift giving, or at least perceiving myself that way.
Almost uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I don't have a strong innate sense, at least this is how it seems to me, of like what kind of stuff people want or need. It's not the giving of the gift, it's the figuring it out part that's difficult and frustrating for me. And it highlights some things for me. Every time your birthday or Christmas comes up, it's like, am I not paying attention to her at all? Like I got nothing. Like I got absolutely nothing.
Was it easier to buy for other partners?
What's that?
Was it easier to buy for other partners?
Not really.
No, okay. I had a theory.
Maybe. Yeah, no, it was. Part of it is because I know you don't need anything.
No. Yeah.
Right. And you're not really into stuff.
No, I'm not really a hobby person either. If someone has a particular hobby,
Right.
and you can buy them a thing for the hobby, And if they
Right.
don't have hobbies, or they have a weird hobby that you don't know anything about, it's quite difficult.
Yep. And so
And
in our,
you have gotten me some really nice gifts.
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go me.
Mm-hmm. You
Couldn't
really
tell
have.
you more. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. We don't need to recount them. But um, so again, I'm still trying to figure out if I have an experience of the shadow side of this. I don't think that that's really what's going on with me. I think it has more to do with the nature of our relationship. Um,
Mm.
um, what other shadow sides? I'm drawing a blank here. What other
Well,
shadow stuff is going on with gift giving?
I mean, I think a lot of it is people pleasing. A lot in and if you received the message when you were growing up that you can buy love,
Okay, great.
buy
There we
appreciation, then you're going to be a gift giver potentially.
Great. So there's a great example of how this quote love language can actually emanate from programming around what
Money.
love looks like
Hmm.
growing up. And again, it's specifically this is programming where it's conditional love that's being programmed in.
Right.
It's not that love can't involve gift giving, or in your case growing up, it's not that love can't involve acts of service. It's just that if it's dependent upon those things, then it is by definition conditional love,
Right.
right? Or um, if you're on the giving end, in this case, if that's programmed into you, that's the one-to-one relationship, love equals giving gifts or spending money on your partner, then you're going to potentially show up and do that freely for somebody that you love and wonder why this person is not happy in the
Right.
relationship.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
won't compute that there's more to love and more to a relationship. Say, well, what do you mean? I bought you all this stuff. That's how much I love you.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. You hear that a lot. Many of the clients that we have worked with that are wealthier, when the marriage just dissolves, the women, mostly women, come in and say, we had all of this stuff but no intimacy.
right.
And the men will come in and say, I gave her all of this, I worked my ass off, and there was no intimacy.
Hmm.
So it's like a double bind, like both
Yeah.
partners are caught in the fact that this isn't the end. Like you can't
Right.
win with this.
Right. Now, in that case, you can actually say that those couples would have benefited from actually having a love languages conversation, right? And
Mhm.
beginning to communicate about that. Our point with this work is that even then, if you're not looking at why those are your love languages, you're still going to be stuck speaking different languages.
Mhm.
Like the wealthy, in your example, it's a little bit cliche, but we'll go with it. The wealthy workaholic man, even after they've had the conversation, is still just going to give gifts because that's all he knows, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Now he's giving gifts knowing that his wife doesn't really appreciate them and feel more loved in this way, but this is all that I know how to do. And so
Right.
I'm going
Yep.
to, right?
Mhm.
Um,
And it just adds to the wound rather than adding to the
right,
intimacy and
right,
connection.
right. So yeah, exploring the shadow side is always essential.
Mhm.
Um,
What we're missing for love languages:
quality
physical
time.
touch, quality time.
Again, we've talked about them, but I want to kind of highlight some specifics around. I think physical touch. Um,
That's a tricky one for a lot of people.
it is.
Hmm.
But I think a very common example that I know we've both seen plenty of is people who insist their love language is physical touch. And
Hmm.
really what they mean by that is sexuality,
Hmm.
right? And
Yep.
really what's going on there often is that there is sexual trauma that is trying to be worked out in the context of a safe relationship,
Hmm.
right?
And or the message that sex is love.
Again, there's if there's the mistaken imprint that's been received that there's a one-to-one relationship, that sex equals love.
Hmm.
um yeah, but there's a lot that can potentially be going on that you're missing if you're just saying, well, no, this is just, I only feel love when my partner is physically and sexually affectionate towards me.
Right.
And it's often, I think, deeply trauma based.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know what else we need to say about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to be fair and balanced, which is which means that we want to also honor that. Again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in a relationship that feels sexually fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. And physically fulfilling if you happen to not be sexual, because some people are not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not saying that that's a problem.
Right.
It's even okay to know that it's shadow driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trauma influencing the desire for physical touch or sexuality. That doesn't mean we say, oh no, this is coming from old wounds and so therefore it's bad. No.
Right. Yeah, no.
It's truly true. Again, the problem is when we put the demand on the partner.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we're having sex, I mean, I've spoken with people like this, that unless they were having sex 2 or 3 times a day, right, they're feeling unfulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
That is not sustainable for most people. That's
Not throughout the life of a relationship, for sure.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Quality time, that one.
I think that's very hard for people too. And it's what I think it's what most people are really craving. You know, for me, quality time is TV's not on, phones are in hands, there's eye contact, there's a conversation that's happening that's meaningful beyond just, you know, the weather and plans of things that are happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard because of the way that we live our lives. We live very fast lives. There's a lot going on. If you're a person that has children, it's more challenging to have quality time with not only your partner, but with each child individually or as a family.
Yeah, I think that of the 5 love languages, this is the one to me that has the most pure kind of echo of unconditional love.
I would agree.
You know, it's like when you move into unconditional love, you really can do quite well without a lot of words of affirmation or giving and receiving of gifts or giving and receiving of acts of service, and it may not even require a ton of physical touch. But that quality time seems to be an essential ingredient.
Yeah. Yeah, I think without that, I would even go so far as to say, why be in a relationship?
Right. I was going to say the same thing, or that I was going to take it a little further and say it's at some point you're really not in a relationship anymore.
Yeah.
Any more than I would say I was in a relationship with a roommate, you know, that I had at some point or other.
Right.
If you're just always kind of passing one another. However, I have also experienced the shadow side of this, which is the demand that all free time be quality together time. I think that's a very common shadow side of this. And again, for lack of a better term, the excuse, so to speak, that comes up for the individual is, well, this is my love language. Like this is this is just an essential ingredient for me, quality time, that we spend time together. But there's great variation in terms of what that can look and feel like, what it can look like in terms of the quantity of time that's spent
Mhm.
together, and also what it can feel like in terms of the nature of what constitutes quality time. You
Mhm.
and I are pretty in sync, but I also have the experience of, like, if you and I are just in the house together at the same time,
Yep.
um, enjoying ourselves, that feels actually like together quality time for me.
Mm.
I don't want it to just be that. And I get like
Sure.
30 or 40 minutes of that. And I, come down the stairs telling you that I miss you. Right. It's very sad, pathetic, but but nonetheless, there's some difference there in terms of maybe what constitutes quality time. Um,
Mm.
to me, I can sit next to you on the couch while you're listening to a podcast and I'm doing whatever, and that feels like quality time to me as well,
Mm. Mhm.
right? And so there is a spectrum of how much time and what that time looks like that's going to vary from person to person.
Mm.
And that, I think, those are really, really, I think that's a really foundational conversation for people to have in a relationship. Like if one person says, well, you know any night that you know isn't taken up with work, I expect us to spend that together.
Mhm.
Somebody else is going, no, I've got like friends and hobbies and all of that. um, there's going to be conflict there.
Right.
And let's just use an example of, like, let's say two extremes. One person's sense of quality time is, as long as we eat dinner together for an hour twice a week, I'm good. And the other person is like, no, we need to eat dinner 7 nights a week or 6 nights a week at least, and or 7 nights a week, and then 6 nights a week after dinner we cuddle on the couch for 2 hours, right?
Mm.
um, One, that's going to create a lot of problems in the relationship, right? A lot of conflict and tension.
Unless each person's okay with that. Yeah.
I'm assuming they're not in this example.
Sure. Got it.
But also, that's also a very easy thing for people to dismiss as, well, this is just how I am with respect to quality time. When in reality, there's the classic, help me out here, attachment.
Secure attachment, anxious
Thank
avoidant.
you.
Mhm.
Yes, secure and anxious attachment issues going on,
Mhm.
right? And one person is using, their low demand for quality time as a way of um, avoiding intimacy,
Mhm.
and the other person is using their high demand for quality time as a way of managing their insecurity.
Mhm. Their fear of abandonment. Mhm. Yeah, and I would say, when you were describing us on the couch, I'm listening to my podcast, you're typing. Whether or not I perceive that to be quality time is solely dependent on my mental state.
Mm,
So there's times when I perceive that to be quality time and
yeah,
times when I don't, depending on how detached or, how well I feel mentally and emotionally. If I'm feeling well, then I will perceive that to be quality time. If I'm not feeling well, then it doesn't
yeah,
really count for me. But that has something to do with you. It has only to do with me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, take home summary for me on this is, this is a book worth reading, or
Just take
do,
the online quiz.
do the
There's
online
plenty of
quiz.
stuff online to read about this. Yeah.
This is really, really worthwhile material to engage in. One, in terms of being in a healthy relationship,
Hmm.
and two, and more importantly, in terms of self-exploration. So engage with this material. The mistake as far as I'm concerned, would be to think that this material is really about love. It's really more about exploring our own psyches and our own unmet needs, our
Mhm.
own trauma, our own wounds. Um, and if you go into it with that understanding, I think that there's a ton of value in it.
Mhm.
And then the other caveat I would say is, um, if you've done this material and you think of yourself as having a love language, I would suggest really looking very hard at how strongly you identify with the love language. It's like identifying with your Enneagram type or your Myers-Briggs personality.
Mhm.
If we let these things put us in a box or a cage, as you said earlier,
Mhm.
um, then it's doing the opposite of what it could be doing. Instead of bringing us closer to ourselves and expanding our self-knowledge, moving us closer to self-realization, it's just trapping us in ego and persona.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, you remember at the beginning, the description I read?
mm,
I mean, in the description, it says different people with different personalities
right.
give and receive love in different ways.
Yeah,
So it's the personality that has these preferences,
that's right.
not the being that we are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
And
it's, takeaways for me, practically speaking, go online, take a love language test. If you have somebody in your life that you have a loving relationship with and you'd like them to take it, ask them if they'll take it, and begin to explore, why do I prefer this? Is there an old unmet need from childhood that I'm trying to get filled as a grown-up? How can I meet this need for myself? How can I ask for this need to be met in a healthy way? Again, like we said, it's not wrong to ask for these things in relationships. In fact, in our relationship, I think we express all of these languages every day, with the exception of buying gifts. But the other languages are being expressed continuously. And if I didn't experience that with you, it's not that I would feel that you didn't love me, but I would be thinking about what has changed, or why is there not this way of expressing love? What's
mhm,
going on?
mhm.
And I would be looking at that. Yeah. And talking about it with you. Yeah.
Okay.
The end.
Okay. All right, everybody. We will see you for the next one.